Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show broadcasting live across the United Kingdom and the world from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie, broadcasting across YouTube, Facebook, Twitter and on TikTok. Welcome to people coming in on all of those digital platforms. Well, do you know, we've got a guest coming up at the bottom of the hour. It's Ashley, who is that Preston journalist who produces a lot of videos on YouTube and on Twitter, and we're going to be speaking to him for 20 minutes at the bottom of the hour. I want to talk about three main things today. We want to talk firstly about the Scottish Parliament's voting yesterday against voter ID. What's all that about? What does it mean, if anything? We also want to talk about what we're calling state-sanctioned sedition, which is the British government enabling the Scottish National Party to hire civil servants, British civil servants, to promote the breakup of the United Kingdom. And we'll also be getting to Busting Indie Myths Part 4 in our long-running series, which is going to bust all the indie myths wide open. So that's a lot to pack in tonight, as well as on this day in British history, as well as our interview with the wonderful Ashley from Preston. So stay tuned for that, folks. Stay tuned for that. Now, the first thing we want to talk about is, some of you may have noticed, or we may just be on the button here before everybody else. There was a vote in the Scottish Parliament yesterday, and what it was, there's 129 members of the Scottish Parliament, and they had a vote on something called the UK Elections Bill. Now, by its name, of course, the UK Elections Bill is a Westminster bill that's going through the British Parliament, the Union Parliament at the moment, and it's passed the House of Commons and it's presently in the House of Lords, and almost certainly all of it, or mostly all of it, is going to be passed as is. Now, it includes a crucial clause in it which says that from henceforth at British general elections throughout the United Kingdom, you will have to take along photographic ID before you vote. Now, of course, that was never a necessity in the past, but times change, cities get bigger, and as a consequence, more problems arise from that, and it has come to pass where this is now a necessity. Voter ID at the actual polling station. Before you can pick up your ballot paper, you have to show that you are, in fact, the person there. And this is because there's been a lot of fraud in British general elections in the recent past, especially actually around postal voting and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure to what extent this addresses the postal voting thing, but this addresses anyway the walking into the polling station and voting situation. Now, for some reason known unto themselves, the Holyrood, or the SNP, basically had a vote on that. Now, it's not their job to vote on that one way or the other, and regardless of what they vote on it, it's going to pass anyway, because it's not a competency of Holyrood, it's a competency of the British Union Parliament, and it's going to pass, and whether Sturgeon likes it or not, it's going to be the case at British general elections throughout the United Kingdom moving forward. However, they had a vote on it to say that they would, quote, withhold legislative consent. Now, that's essentially a meaningless concept because they have no legislative power over that anyway. So it's just grandstanding, a waste of time, a waste of energy, a waste of money, but it allows them to posture as if they have a say in it. And of course, most people don't know what they have or have not a say in, and so they just imagine that there's some kind of conflict here between the SNP and the Scottish Parliament and the British Parliament, when in fact, to be frank with you, it's nothing to do with the MSPs at Holyrood, nothing to do with them at all. However, it was interesting to see how the vote fell. Now, there's 129 MSPs and 128 of them have voting power. if you discount the chairwoman, and 120 altogether voted, and it fell 91 against the UK elections bill and 29 for. In other words, all the SNP, Labour and Lib Dems all opposed the use of voter ID, and the only people who voted for it were the Tories. Okay, that's kind of absurd, really. What's Labour and Lib Dems thinking? I mean, why on earth would they possibly want people to be able to fraudulently vote? Why would they want that? Because there's no other argument against voter ID than to say we actually would like it if people voted fraudulently. Okay, now they come out with this kind of nonsense. The SNP come out with this nonsense, like it's preventing, it's excluding some people. Now, well, who's it excluding? People who don't have photographic ID. Well, there will be a few people who don't have photographic ID, presumably, but the bill allows for them to acquire photographic ID free of charge from their local elections office. So nobody is being excluded, but the integrity of the vote is being ensured. And that's the important thing. Because if we believe in anything, if we believe in democracy, you have to believe in the absolute integrity of the vote. One person, one vote. And if one person comes along and votes fraudulently, then that person has cancelled out your vote. I've always been conscious of that since I was a little boy. I remember reading an article way back in the 80s in the Daily Telegraph, and it was about a woman who was an invigilator at a polling station in New York City. And this would be back in the 80s, maybe early 90s. And they had these mechanical machines where you pull a lever. And when she arrived at the polling station for work, first thing in the morning, she found the boss of the polling station in the back of one of the voting machines, rigging it so that it had already churned up several hundred votes for his chosen candidate. And obviously this was a tough area of New York, and she was not about to kick up a fuss with this rough-looking individual. So she just thought, I've just got to get through the day safely. But she did tell her story afterwards, and that story always remained with me because it shocked me, because I realised that the American voting system had been corrupted by the introduction of these mechanical voting devices. Now, of course, it's much, much worse. Once they introduced the electronic voting machines, then you may as well sort of forget American democracy. Anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but it really did strike me about the extent to which your vote can easily be cancelled out by fraud. And of course, in America, fraud is massive. It's just like huge in America because it's such a massive place. And in fact, a book arrived in the office today called Rigged, about the 2020 election, which I'm going to talk about at another time. Anyway, back to Scotland, and what we have is the SNP, in cahoots with Labour and the Lib Dems, trying to make it easier to have a fraudulent vote. Now, this hasn't gone down well on Twitter because everybody's asking, what on earth are the SNP and Labour playing at? You need an ID to do anything now. I mean, you need an ID to apply for a bus pass, okay? You need an ID to apply for a bus pass. You need what is a so-called vaccine passport if it is not a form of ID, a form of very personal medical ID that you have to show to some random doorman, right? So the SNP are happy with that. Oh yeah, you've got to have your address, your name, your medical details, everything, and show it to some random doorman. They're okay with that, but not taking a picture of yourself to the polling station. The only people who would want to complain about voter ID are those sorts of people who might have something to lose by it, okay? Who might have something to lose by it. And because that's the only thing you can get to. That's the only sort of thing you can think. Why would you be against voter ID? It must be because you've got something to lose by the system instituting it. And for example, how do you get, say the Royal Mail delivers your parcel to the depot, you've got to show ID to pick up a parcel, for crying out loud. There's no real problem about showing ID, but oh no, when it comes to voting, you mustn't have ID to vote. Absurd. So, as I said, the SNP claim that voter ID will somehow exclude people without an income, but by using that same logic, why do they insist on ID to apply for a bus pass? Aren't those bus passes for people who are low on income? But they insist on you showing ID to apply for that. So how can they use that argument to oppose voter ID? Thankfully, though, they won't have any say over it anyway, because thankfully it's a British parliamentary bill to pass at the British general election. What they do have control over, though, is Holyrood elections and council elections. And, of course, the council elections are coming up this May, the first Thursday in May this year. And we'll be talking more about them in future programmes, but please remember to be registered to vote, and please do vote at the council elections, because they're as important as any election. That brings us on, of course, as well to just the whole extent to which the democratic system is being manipulated. And we wrote an article about this, the undemocratic dangers of postal voting, and it's up there in the thread. We wrote that last year, and we basically ran down why postal voting is not a good idea, except for those people who can't get to a polling station because of geographical location or because of personal disabilities. Certainly a small number needs that, but a large number of people, now 1 in 4 people in Scotland vote by post. That's so open to not just fraud, but to unfairness as well. We laid that out in our article. Won't go into that just now. But as I say, in my ongoing efforts to rescue American democracy from imminent catastrophe, as if I don't have enough on my plate at the moment, why I bought this book, which looks really, really interesting. Rigged: How the Media, Big Tech and the Democrats Seized Our Elections. Looking forward to reporting on what that's all about, and to see if there's anything that can be done. We do not want to go the way of the American system, though, which is basically definitely not fit for purpose. Oh my goodness me. Oh, I've got a book through there on when they introduced the electronic machines and the absolute catastrophe that brought about as well. But the media just keep all this low key. They don't mention it, and they don't mention it because they want to maintain the illusion that American democracy still works. And maybe they have to, because maybe it's irrecoverable, maybe it's irreparable. I hope not. But it's certainly in a bad situation. Now we've got a guest coming up, which is Ashley, that Preston journalist. Really looking forward to speaking to him. Well, Gordon says, why is Westminster being asked to pay for the mess that our First Minister made over Christmas and the New Year? It's a good question. Talking about Westminster paying for a mess, that brings us on nicely to what we're calling state-sanctioned sedition. State-sanctioned sedition, or state-funded sedition, which is that the United Kingdom government is enabling the SNP to destroy the United Kingdom. How so? Well, it's been reported, it was reported last week, that the SNP has assembled a team of civil servants who work for the civil service in Edinburgh, has brought together a team of 11 civil servants who have been tasked with, quote, preparing an independence prospectus. Preparing an independence prospectus. And these civil servants, it's been calculated, are on altogether £700,000 a year. And their job now is to prepare an independence prospectus for the SNP. And who's paying for that? The British taxpayer is paying for that. Now think about that, okay? We cannot win a battle to save the United Kingdom if the United Kingdom itself is paying its own civil service to destroy the United Kingdom. I'm going to say that again. We cannot win a battle to save the UK if the UK itself is paying its own civil service to destroy the UK. And that is the situation that we've got. The civil service in Scotland is part of what's called the Home Civil Service, which is controlled ultimately by what's called the United Kingdom Cabinet Secretary, who's at this time is called a man called Simon Case. He is ultimately in charge. He sits in the British Cabinet. He's called the Cabinet Secretary. And he has, there's a person, I think it's still a woman, in Edinburgh who's in charge of the Scottish branch of the Home Civil Service. But he's ultimately in charge of it. And this problem of civil servants working to break up the very state that pays their own wages, this was never a problem prior to 2007, when, of course, the Labour Party was in power at Holyrood. But when 2007 came along, and when Alex Salmond became the First Minister, nothing changed. Okay, the Cabinet Secretary at the time was a Labour man called Gus O'Donnell, and he actually visited Holyrood and he said that nothing will change because we respect the devolution settlement, okay? Which is to say that we haven't explicitly prohibited the civil service from doing this hitherto, so we're just going to let them continue to do it and to continue to follow the commands of their masters and their ministers, who are the SNP. He was not about to stop that happening. Now, you would have thought when a Tory government came along, they would at least have said, wait a minute, this isn't right. This has to stop. Okay, we can't have them doing this. You would have thought they would have thought that. But no, as we know from many of the Tory people, the Tory MPs and that, they don't want to fight. They're herbivores who would rather run and hide or just pretend it's not happening or look the other way and just let things drift. Just let things drift. And that's the situation we're in at the moment. And it's drifted to the point where Nicola Sturgeon can set up 11 civil servants on £700,000 a year to work on breaking up the United Kingdom. Now imagine if you ran a business, okay, and your employees were working day to day on how to destroy your business. Don't you think you would at least fire them? Or you would say, no, that's not allowed. Find another job or get with the programme, but don't do that. You would have thought that's what the situation would be. But no, it just drifts on. Now the Tories are always looking for a win. How do we save the union? How do we maintain the union? How do we strengthen the union? Well, a very good way of strengthening the union, and a very, very, very easy win. A very easy win would be simply to pass a law to say that you're not allowed to, no devolved administration is allowed to use civil servants to break up the primary state that pays its own wages. And you know what? We wrote the law on that, basically. And it's here in our magazine, Do More Together. A law to stop the civil service pushing indie agenda. And we have written the 6 clauses which lock it down. And they're perfectly fair and they're perfectly normal. But basically, the first clause reads, the Home Civil Service, wherever it is based in the UK or worldwide, shall not be used, nor shall it be allowed at any time to assist or promote by any means, including physical, economic, research and administrative, any devolved UK administration on any matter which falls outside that administration's devolved competencies or which relates to a reserved matter, especially including but not limited to the separation of any part of the United Kingdom from the rest of the UK. And that would be an easy win for them to bring in something like that with their 80-seat majority and basically throw a spanner in the works and strengthen the Union. And if you want to read more about that, it's 40-page magazine, Do More Together. The link's up there in the comment thread on Facebook and on Twitter. Please do purchase it. It's only a £5 and it's full of good news. And you know what? Purchase two and send one to your local MP or MSP. It's that time of the programme where it's on this day in British history. Because British history matters. British history matters. Now, what happened on this day last year? On this day last year, Captain Tom Moore passed away 2nd of February 2021, aged 100 and 9 months, almost reaching his 101st birthday. And what's he about? Well, he rose to prominence as a consequence of his decision back in April 2020, just a few days before his birthday, to decide to raise money for NHS charities together by doing lengths of his garden in his Zimmer frame. And that caught the imagination of primarily the media and also the government at the time. And they thought it would be a good idea to big up this guy, quite rightly, and thereby also get some kind of support going for the NHS at the same time. So he was a kind of right place, right time kind of guy, doing his garden jaunt. And he initially just wanted to raise a few £1,000s, but by the time his birthday came around a fortnight later, he had raised £30 million, and the subsequent figure reached £40 million. And as a result of public pressure, he was knighted by the Queen in the grounds of Windsor Castle on the 17th of July 2020. And how did he get his name Captain? Well, during the war, he had been conscripted into the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and he was selected for officer training, and he served with the Royal Armoured Corps in India and in Burma. And he was born in Keighley. That was Captain Tom Moore. Sadly passed away, but at least he was 100 years old, and he raised 40 million for the NHS. And I hate to think how they pissed that up the wall, quite frankly, but probably on doctors' salaries or something like that. But let's hope that they spent it on like bandages and plasters and things that you would want them to spend it on. But they probably spent it on, reports into diversity or something like that. Knowing the good old NHS, but not to be cynical about it. At least he had his heart in the right place, and let's hope some of his money at least went to medical things that were necessary. Now, I'm going to ask you a question on that actually right now. For this competition time, the original and finest British mixed fruits sweeties by Simpkins in this nice tin that will be winging its way to you tomorrow. If you can answer the question that I'm about to say, and please send your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk. And the question is, on this day, Captain Tom Moore passed away in 2021. What age was he? Send your answer, please, folks, to contact@forceforgood.uk. And if you haven't done it before, it's really easy. So if you haven't done it before, please send to that address. Good stuff. Now we're going to bring in our good friend and colleague Ashley, who many of you will know is also known as that Preston journalist. And please, folk, give a warm A Force for Good welcome to Ashley. Hey there, Ashley.
Evening, Alistair. You well?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. How are you yourself over there?
Yeah, very good,
Preston?
Yeah, very good. It's good to be back. Yeah, loving it.
Excellent. Well, do you know, we were going to have you on at the Union Telethon.
Yeah.
But you had other business.
I did. I got married.
Yeah. Could you? Yeah. That's exactly. Well done for that, and hope you're enjoying married life there. And we wish you all the very best in that, and all the best to Mrs. Ashley, that Preston journalist. Yeah. So you've been doing a Trojan's work as far as short videos on Twitter and on YouTube are concerned, and well done. And what I really like about what you do is you do a lot of stuff related to Scotland as well, and it's not just. I mean, in fact, you're probably the main person that's put in short videos about day-to-day events that are happening in Hollywood. You're probably the main person putting those out at the moment on Twitter. Have you been pleased with the reception that you've been getting on those?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a few Scottish nationalists do follow my page and give me a mouthful every now and again, but it's water for ducks back. Majority of it is more than positive, and I couldn't be happy with the way it's gone so far. Yeah, definitely. It's just goes to show the silent majority. We clearly are the majority. It's just that we don't hear about it enough in the media, do we?
Well, absolutely. We need to hear about it, and we need to hear your particular takes and the takes of different people, because the media up here in Scotland are essentially scared. But when they're not scared of Sturgeon, they're dependent upon Sturgeon, because she's been pumping millions and millions of pounds in the last 2 years into certainly the newspaper and the television channels with her propaganda related around the medical issue that's going around. So
just think where that millions of pounds could have gone. Exactly.
Well, what's your thoughts on I know you've been following Keir Starmer and also his views on like more powers and things like that, and you made a video, I believe, on that, didn't you? Just maybe a couple of days ago I saw that.
Yeah.
What was your thinking behind that? What's your position on that?
I think the Unionist Cause has taken a bit of a worrying turn, to be honest with you. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still convinced that we'll win out eventually. However, it seems to me that Labour, and even the Tories to an extent now, are kissing the backsides of the SNP and actually trying to appease them to such an extent that they're trying to attract their voters to vote for them. And if that means, in Starmer's case, if that means giving Holyrood more powers or giving the SNP more powers, just so he can get a few more voters over to his side, then I think he's more than happy to do it. And I also think he's looking forward, because since Labour lost the Scottish vote, they've never actually won a general election. And they know they need the Scottish vote, and the only way they're ever going to get that back at the moment is by an SNP Labour coalition. And I think that's exactly what he's thinking about.
An SNP Labour coalition, yeah. That's worrying. That's worrying, because what people say, and I do believe that we're not going to have a referendum between now and the next British general election, but we don't know when the next British general election is actually going to be. And as we know, things move awfully fast, and I mean, it's likely that Boris will survive, but if Boris didn't survive and there was a British general election before it's due, or even when it's due, and if Starmer just kind of scraped in, then he could be looking about for allies, and the SNP could try to do a deal with them and say, yeah, we will give you whatever you want if you give us a referendum. And I'm not convinced that he's got the stamina, or indeed any of these Labour folk have the stamina to refuse that.
Keir Starmer said openly in an interview once that he's quite, laid back or nonchalant about the breakup of the UK. He said he's not that bothered. He basically said he's not that bothered about it, and that's really why. Oh yeah. He said he openly said it. He said he's laid back about it. Basically, he's not. He's not going mad about it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought I lost you then.
No, sorry.
So yeah, I think he'd be happy to do a deal with the SNP, and unfortunately, the way things look at the moment, the SNP will probably be the only ones to offer him enough seats to do that coalition.
Yeah, exactly. That's the real fear, because there's too many MPs, and we're not just talking about Labour, also in the Tory benches as well, who, and we always say this, who don't really understand what the United Kingdom is, and some of them, no harm to them, but some of them do just kind of imagine it's just some kind of greater England, and they don't really see that it's all four parts of us together. We do actually form something special together, and so they don't really see the value in that. When they think of Scotland or Northern Ireland, for example, they just think of trouble, or these troublesome people in those areas, which we often are troublesome, but they imagine that somehow, if there was no United Kingdom, all these troublesome people would somehow just disappear, and it would all be hunky dory, and we'd all be getting on with each other. They don't see, well, what would the actual political dynamics change to being? And what you would have was, like in Scotland, you'd have a Scottish sort of nationalist parliament who was now focusing on the English Parliament as the main opposition, and the English Parliament would see advantage in having a go at the Scots, and vice versa, and it would just, the whole thing would just become very, very inter-conflict between Scottish, English, Irish, and Welsh again, just like it was in the past.
The major issue we've got with the one party you should be able to count on, if anything, to defend the UK would be, you'd think, the Conservative and Unionist Party. But the major problem we've got with the Conservatives, certainly down here, is that a lot of them, believe it or not, were paper candidates. They didn't even expect to get in. They didn't campaign. They purely got in because of Boris, his campaigning, and because of the Brexit ticket. And now a lot of them are there. They're absolutely happy to sit back and vote with Boris and do what he tells them to, no matter what it means. They're not going to speak out for the UK. They're not going to speak out against Boris, for example. So they're perfectly happy to basically allow the government to do what they want. There's only a few senior Tories that have got the guts to actually stand up against the SNP and stand up for the values of the UK. Unfortunately, that's where we're stuck. People like David Davis and Dr. Liam Fox, for example, are the only ones that I've seen speaking up properly. Whereas the younger ones, this new generation of Tory, who aren't really Conservatives, simply don't want to.
What's your thoughts? Are you anywhere near that Tory that crossed the House a couple of weeks ago?
Not too far, about 45 minutes away.
What do you make of all of that? What do you think that was a consequence of?
I think he's trying to keep hold of his seat. That's what it is. He's in a seat that's always been Labour. He managed to win it by 402 votes. He now sees the polls changing. And he thinks that he's got a better chance of winning that seat back with Labour. That's what's happening. I know someone that knows him, and he has slagged off Labour absolutely all the time. He's a big Brexiteer. He was involved in the Vote Leave campaign with Nigel Farage. He's not a Labour politician at all. Yeah, he's just done this to try and save his own skin when it comes to the next general election.
Right. That's an interesting angle, actually. That's a very interesting angle that I hadn't really thought about. You know much more of what's going on there on the ground than I do. It's good to have your input into that to tell us that. Yeah, Sandra says there's no one fighting our corner. That's what it often seems like.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? It's like I said, this new breed of Conservative, if you will, they're not traditional Conservatives that will stick up for the UK. Some are, obviously, but there's some that will literally go where the wind blows just to try and save their own skin and stay in a highly paid job they didn't expect to get in the first place.
Yeah, they didn't expect to get in the first place.
Yeah,
that's absolutely so true. Yeah. Well, what you've also been doing, which I thank you for, is bringing attention to things that have been going on here in Scotland, which maybe we haven't been paying so much attention to. And there was one just the other night, and we've got video here on Twitter that will line it up. It was on Monday night. There was a rally, a surprisingly well-attended rally outside Stewart Street Police Station, and it was to complain, and then, well, not complain, protest basically against this really kind of weird, one could say perverted thing that young people have got to fill in if they want a bus pass, right? You think for a bus pass you don't really have to say very much at all, if anything, to get a bus pass. But of course this is modern day Scotland, when in fact modern day Scotland wants to know absolutely everything about your life and try to take you down who knows what sort of strange rabbit holes. And we'll just play the video when we're ready. There, we'll just bring it in. And this was the organizer. He just calls himself Glasgow Cabbie because that's his job. He's a Glasgow Cabbie, and he is he's just play that video then.
Wow, thanks very much for coming along here tonight. It really is a pleasure to look at the amount of people here that genuinely concern themselves with the children of Scotland. You people care. You care far more than the Scottish Government. I must thank Steve Pollard for coming along here today. Steve's an immense help to me, as have so many others. The amount of people have offered their hand of friendship, have come to me, contacted me, and put themselves out to be here, not for me, but for the children of Scotland. These are the important people. But the Scottish Government, to my mind, are committing a crime. That crime is sex abuse of children in Scotland. If I was to stand in Buchanan Street with any lady in here, any lady at all, and ask the questions directly from the survey, directly from the Scottish Government survey to 14 and 15-year-olds, I would be arrested in minutes. I would be charged with sex offences. So therefore, what gives the Scottish Government a right to challenge our children, put them under severe pressure to answer paedophilic questions at school where they could be embarrassed by their peers? This is a crime being committed in front of each and every one of us. And I'm so glad that you guys are here in support of these children. They matter deeply to me. I've got two elderly children in their 20s. I've no grandchildren. I'm just glad that I'm here and that we've got voices here. We've also got Richard Lucas here of the Scottish Family Party. Richard's got more knowledge on the crimes being committed by the Scottish Government, and Nicola Sturgeon, who refuses point blank to withdraw these surveys. She is committing crimes against our children. Nicola does not have children of her own.
Yeah, there you go. That was a good speech there from the organizer of that. And as I say, he got at least 200 or 300 people there, which on a freezing cold Monday night in Glasgow was really good. And it just shows that there's considerable concern about that, and indeed where that strange obsession is coming from. And I won't cast any aspersions, but clearly there's people within the Holyrood and the governing establishment who are getting their kicks, quite frankly, from that sort of thing, and that's a damn shame, quite frankly.
Well, I can't imagine. Racking my brains, I can't think of any political reason, good or bad, why you would need this kind of information, or why you'd need to ask children as young as 14 these kind of questions. When someone sent me this a while ago, and when I read it, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I thought it was some sort of joke, and after going through it, it's perfectly true. And some of the questions, they're really in depth, And as Glasgow Cabby said there, if you went up to a 14-year-old in the street and asked them that sort of question, you'd be arrested and thrown in jail.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He made a good point there. In fact, if you went to anybody on the street and asked them that, you'd be in big trouble, and quite rightly so. But
like you said, you'd be a pervert, wouldn't you? That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, but that's right. That's what it is, and clearly there are perverts putting these policies together, and that's just a fact. That's just a fact. It's not like that's a surprise or anything like that. And Holyrood's a strange place as far as that sort of thing is concerned at the best of times. Anyway,
the only positive. Sorry, go on.
So no, it's just to say thank you for bringing that to our attention, because otherwise we would probably have missed that. So we put that out today on Twitter as well.
I'm going to say there's a slight positive to it. At first, the SNP have doubled down and like they always do, and don't want to climb down from anything. And the last thing we heard from the SNP was an MP of theirs called Hannah Bardell, who defended it and said that she was asked these questions as a teenager, and she blamed it on misogyny and violence against women. As far as I can see, I can't make a connection with the two anyway.
No.
But then, since then, 10 out of 32 Scottish councils have now rejected it outright and said they're not going to be using it. And another 11 have said that they are going to review the content in it and make a decision at a later date. So it looks like the tide's turning.
Right, well, that's interesting. That's interesting to know those sorts of figures. At least there are a few councils then that still have some kind of common sense and are not going to be browbeaten into that sort of nonsense. Thank goodness. But unless
Definitely.
people make a fuss about it, then the system will try and get away with whatever it possibly can. That's just the nature of the beast, as it were. They'll try to get away with everything.
Sadly, your council's still going for it.
Are they? Well, that doesn't
you won't be surprised to know. Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me. Well, talking about councils, if people want to get rid of councils, this is the year to do it, because the council elections in Scotland are on the first Thursday of March. I don't have the date. If somebody can get the date of that, first Thursday in May. And it's by a system of voting whereby you can vote by number for your first candidate, your second choice, your third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And what we advise is you don't need to do that, and we don't advise that you do it. Just vote for who you want and nobody else. A lot of people they go into the council elections and they think they've got to tick everybody in order. They don't have to. They can just tick number one, or they can tick 2 people or 3 people, but they don't need to vote for everybody. And what we're saying is just vote for anybody other than the SNP and the Greens, because they are the architects of our current misfortune. And we'll leave the rest to people to do. So that's this May, so we do have a chance to change the makeup of our councils this May. So that's
even just a bit of an impact to be something, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Something's better than nothing. Even if it can just show a bit of, SNP lose at least a few seats, that would say something at least.
Yes, exactly. That has to happen. It has to happen. Absolutely. Now, it's we've had you on there for 20 minutes or so. Thank you very much, Ashley. For people who want to see your stuff, where do you recommend is the best place to check you out?
Okay, yeah, so YouTube is just that Preston Journalist, as you can see on the screen, or you can look at me on Twitter, which is at AKWriting88.
Okay, excellent. And we do recommend that you do that. I'll just put that up, AKWriting88.
Yeah.
On Twitter. There you go, AKWriting88 on Twitter. Good. 88, is that the year you were born?
It is.
Yeah, I thought so. Everybody does that with their stuff. It's so easy to remember, It's like,
yeah, well, that's it, exactly.
Yeah. Good. Well, Thank you very much, Ashley. We'll have you on again, and more power to your elbow. Thanks very much for being here today. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Alistair. Thanks, everyone. See you later.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Wonderful, wonderful. That's Ashley. Thank you very much to Ashley. Catherine says, thanks, Ashley. Good job. And fantastic bloke. We just need more thoughtful, intelligent young people like Ashley in our country, and we would have an assured future together. No question about that. Let me just bring this up. Yeah. Busting Indie Myths Part 4. Now this is where we take something that the Nats say and we basically just tell the facts about how they're wrong on it, and basically promote the fact that they don't know what they're talking about, and we do. And that's why people watch us and why they listen to us. And one of the things that they'll say is that England gets what it wants and England always outvotes Scotland. Okay, so Busting Indie Myths Part 4. The Scottish nationalists will always say that England gets what it wants and that somehow Scotland always gets outvoted. Now, what is the truth of that strange comment? Well, the idea is that because there's more members of Parliament from England and considerably more than there are in Scotland, then what England wants, England is going to get. Well, there's a fundamental misunderstanding there. And it's based upon the fact that the British Parliament does not vote as constituent nations. Okay? The British Parliament does not vote as England or Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland against each other. That's a complete misconception and a misunderstanding of how it works. It's a unitary state. Everybody goes to the British Parliament to vote on behalf of Britain together. And they do so on party lines and ideological lines, okay? The British Parliament votes not by home nation, but by party and ideology, okay? So it doesn't vote England versus Scotland versus Wales versus Northern Ireland. It votes Tory versus Labour versus SNP versus Lib Dem versus Plaid Cymru versus Green versus DUP versus Independent, and so on and so forth. It votes on party and ideological lines, and very often the parties will be split themselves, and you'll have Tories voting against Tories, voting against Labour, voting against Labour, and we saw that very much at the Brexit negotiations, which dragged on for far too long. Okay, so England never outvotes Scotland, and it never has, and it never will, because it doesn't. The British Parliament does not vote on that basis. It does not vote nation against nation. It votes party and ideology against each other, and very often the parties even themselves are split on certain questions. So, to hear the end of the matter, England does not and never does outvote Scotland. Political parties outvote each other. Now, why has that misconception come into play? It's come into play because SNP supporters think that the SNP is Scotland. Okay, so when they see the SNP being outvoted, they think that Scotland is being outvoted. Okay, that's not how it is. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the SNP party is being outvoted, or some of the people in the SNP party are being outvoted. But it's not Scotland being outvoted, because there are other MPs in the British Parliament from Scotland who are not in the SNP. So, the British Parliament votes on party and ideological lines. It does not vote country against country. England never outvotes Scotland. It never has, and it never will. And indeed, if the last few years, especially during the Brexit negotiations, have taught us anything, then it has taught us that. Okay? England does not outvote Scotland. Unless you imagine that Scotland is the SNP, which it most certainly is not. We'll be back next week for Busting Indie Myths Part 5. Good stuff. Good stuff. And we wrote an article actually on this, and you'll find that in the comment thread as well. Well, it's just after 8 o'clock now. We're going to say goodbye. We'll be back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, broadcasting across all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and around the world, bringing quality pro-UK comment and analysis. And until then, it just remains for me to say, everybody, thank you for watching. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen. See you next week.